everybody. Welcome to CARE's second episode of a 7-part series. Today's topic is feeding concerns from yum to I'm Sarah. I'm the director of CARES, and for those of you that might be new to our community, we want to welcome you. We're going to be doing this, like I said, every Sunday for the next 6 weeks. We're going to take a break next week, just so you know we had a schedule change. We're going to take a break next week, but we're going to resume on the 21st. So anyway, CARES is a nonprofit organization that started here in Putnam County in 2017. We have since focused on community outreach and support for children and families on the autism spectrum. And we envision a West Virginia where all children have the tools, access, and support they need in order to thrive. And as a part of that, we would like to welcome you again. I'm going to bring on Taylor McClanahan, who is a parent volunteer for CARES. She is also a Master's of Social Work student at Marshall University, and she's here as part of this to do a bring us to an emphasis on self-care. I think often as caregivers, we forget to take care of ourselves, and Taylor is so great at putting it back into perspective because you cannot pour from an empty cup. So without further ado, welcome, Taylor.
Hi there.
How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I think I'm getting a little cold, so my voice is like not great tonight, so I won't be doing a lot of talking.
Well, I'm so glad that we're here again doing this. I'm so thankful to everyone tuning in. I'm so thankful for our presenter today. I want to remind everyone that we're here because we have something in common, and that's parents and caregivers needing support. So let's remember to be kind to each other in the comments. Let's not focus on anything that would divide or attack each other. We're here to support each other, and I'm so thankful for everyone here. I'm so thankful that we have lined up today Brooke, who's going to speak with us about feeding concerns. And so please feel free to say hi in the comments, comment questions. They'll be answered after her presentation. Thank you guys so much.
Before I bring Brooke on, I would like to say that while we're here to support each other and to discuss topics that probably affect some of our lives, most of our lives who are tuning in, CARES is not by any way giving you medical advice. We are just kind of informing you on topics, and we hope that you then reach out and begin to ask more questions and get some answers for your kids and your loved ones. But I just wanted to put that disclaimer out there for anybody. I'm also going to post in the comments Taylor's informed consent form. By participating in this and sharing with us, it is a public forum, so therefore we might show your name on the screen. If you don't want me to do that, just maybe put a little note there and I won't bring your comment up. So, all right. With that, I'm going to bring Brooke on. Brooke Cunningham.
Hi.
Hi. Welcome.
Thank you guys for having me today.
Oh, yeah, no. Oh, my huskies are barking. Sorry about that. Brooke is what does CCC stand for?
You're good. So CCC is Certificate of Clinical Competence. It is our national recognition for licensure through ASHA, or organization. And so somebody that is going through the national steps to be a speech pathologist will have CCC SLP, or they'll be CFY SLP. And so that's just a new graduate that's working towards their Cs. But
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing. I didn't know that.
You're good.
All right. Well, welcome to our show. I'm going to go ahead and I'll bring your presentation up.
Okay.
Maybe. All right, so there we go.
All right. So today we're going to talk a little bit about feeding concerns, and from basically going yum to and seeing if you have concerns for your child, the steps that you could maybe take for getting a feeding evaluation and going forward for feeding therapy if you need that. Just as a presenter disclosure, I have no financial or personal relationships to disclose with these fine ladies, other than the fact that they are asking for volunteers and doing wonderful things. A little bit about me. I was born and raised in Charleston, West Virginia, and I went to Marshall University to get my bachelor's and my master's degree in communication disorders. I have went through the ringer in Kanawha County for the past 3.5 years as an SLP in pediatric outpatient and early intervention settings. And I, like I said before, am licensed nationally, and I am licensed within the state as well for an SLP. And something that is dear to my heart and that I always try to advocate is know better and do better. And so I have received an ACE award through our National Organization for Continuing Education.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's a big deal.
Know better, do better.
I love it.
So today I just wanted to start off with a little bit of some facts about feeding disorders. It's something that a lot of people don't know about. Like I said, once you know better, you do better. For children with autism, recent research has showed that a child with an autism diagnosis is 5 times more likely to have a feeding difficulty. Even on top of that, up to 90% of children with autism disorders can have a feeding difficulty in some point in their life. And so that puts this population at a whole at a little bit larger risk for feeding difficulties. And so it's so important and commendable for parents of a child with autism to know feeding and know where things can go wrong. Feeding difficulties that have been identified in research are food refusals. And so if you have a child that refuses an entire food group, if you have children that are selective about feeding, and so if it's very specific to a brand or a logo even of a specific type of Doritos, temperature, taste, all of those things are food selectivities. Food stealing was something that was brought up in the research. On top of that, vomiting, gastrointestinal issues, or some other signs of feeding disorders. Rapid eating, oral motor problems, and challenging behaviors or sensory concerns at mealtimes. Those are all little things to kind of keep in mind in terms of looking at a feeding disorder for your child. So if you're sitting there and you have listened to some of those symptoms and you're kind of kicking around, maybe this is something that I need to look at for my child. What exactly would a professional warrant for a further evaluation? My biggest thing that I coach to my parents and to children, parents of children that I might know, just advocating, is that the biggest thing for me is that if you as a parent have a concern for your child, that is the number one step for warranting a further evaluation for your kid. You are with your child more than anybody else. And so if you have a concern for your child, if you feel like something's not right, that's your number one sign. On top of that, if you have medical considerations, if your child's not making weight gains, if they're not growing like you feel like they should, if your pediatrician has mentioned maybe we should start looking at some dietary supplements and things like that, if there have been concerns about nutrition and weight gain and development brought up, that's another piece for your parental concern. Secondary to that, if I mention mealtime and I see a parent, their face is blank, they're glazed over, mealtime stress is a significant factor on whether or not if your child should get a feeding evaluation for you or your child. Because if one person is stressed, then we know that everybody around them can pick up on that stress and they can read that stress and it might build their own stress. And so negative reactions with mealtimes, anxious, uneasy, stressful, inflexible. Those are things that I've heard from parents in relation to mealtimes for them and their child. And so that's a big piece for me. On top of that, down there, meal prep as well. If you feel like you have to prepare a separate meal for your child, if you feel like that you are preparing one thing over and over again and you are stuck in that pattern, that's something, again, that's a little bit of a mealtime stressor, and a flag for an evaluation. So from there, there's some additional things as well. If you're looking for just further support of an evaluation need, if your child has a history of feeding difficulties from birth onward, if your baby had a difficult time latching, if formulas and breast milk and those transitions were harder for your baby, if transitioning from purees to table foods, from bottles to purees, if those were things that were really significant when you look back for your child, those could have been early pieces for feeding difficulties. And so that's a piece that I zone in on as a specialist. And then from there, limited dietary inventory. If your child's refusing to eat meats, if they do not eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, if there's a class or category of foods that they are not interested in or have a hard time eating, that's a big sign for me. I always get a parent that laughs and says, my kid won't eat their vegetables. Does that warrant from like a feeding eval for me? That's a little bit of a further question, but I do have kids that refuse vegetables. And there's other things behind that as to why they might be refusing that. And so I definitely don't discount that. It might not be just a kid thing. There might be something else going on there. On top of the dietary inventory, the specificity that I mentioned before of brands. If you have a child that is very brand specific, if you go to Walmart and they have your Lucky Charms, but they might not be the specific box your child is used to. If your child eats French fries from McDonald's and you are stuck and have to get those French fries from McDonald's or they're not going to eat. Those are specificities that are a little bit of red flags for a feeding eval. Okay. So from there, if you have heard all of that information and going forward, you kind of question, that's my kid. What do I need to be doing? You are going to be looking at a referral process. The biggest key part of your referral is going to be your pediatrician. They're going to be in your corner and on your team from day one if you're seeking a feeding eval. And so you need to start there. That's base one of the game. Talk with your pediatrician, share your concerns. I always tell parents if they're going to open that conversation to take some notes with them. Because anybody that might be in a little bit of a confrontational situation, not that it's always confrontational, but it might be nerve-wracking to go to a professional and say, I need you to support me on this. If that feels like that might be you, write down some thoughts and guide that conversation a little bit more. Share those concerns that we just talked about. If you need to look back, write down some of those things that my child is very specific. He's had a history of some dietary problems. All of those things, you can take that in for your pediatrician. Something that has also been really beneficial for families is to take a food diary. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can just be a couple of jotted down meals for 2 or 3 days. And that's one of your most powerful tools that you could ever have in feeding services, is writing down maybe what you presented your child for breakfast and what they ate. And same thing for lunch and dinner. And so you can kind of have a guideline of, you offered these new foods, but maybe your child just touched it and pushed it off their plate. They stuck with their preferred foods. When something new was offered, meltdown happened. Stress skyrocketed and just, it was a negative mealtime experience. You can write all those things down in a little bit of a food diary, and that will completely supplement your concerns for your pediatrician. From there, your pediatrician will probably look at referring you for an SLP or a multidisciplinary team referral. I put both of those in there because there are ultimately 2 options that you have. You can speak with an SLP who specializes in feeding, or you can look at a multidisciplinary team. If you are in a place where you can access a multidisciplinary team, then I fully recommend that you can take advantage of that if that's an opportunity for you. A multidisciplinary team is the ideal in terms of looking at a feeding evaluation for your child. They will often have multiple members that can look at your child's needs comprehensively, whether it be psychology, occupational therapy, speech therapy, a dietitian. There are multiple professionals there that will zone in on their own specialties and be able to give you a little bit more of a holistic picture for your kid. After you've made those connections, then you're going to be looking at case histories and documentations for intake, and then the day of your feeding evaluation. So what might that feeding eval look like for you when you go? Every professional is different, and I speak from more of a generalized standing for feeding professionals. And so you're going to complete that big case history, and it's going to have a lot of information regarding your child's medical history and maybe even their therapeutic history. And so if they've had therapy before, if things haven't worked, if you have tried X, Y, and Z, and you see progress, but you're stuck. Those are all things that can be in that clinical documentation. From there, you can also have developmental history, and your child's feeding development will probably also be touched on as well. And so that feeding development, all that's going to look like is how your child did when they were born with feeding, if bottle feeding was hard, if formulas, you tried 3 or 4 before you found that one formula that really worked. If bottles needed to be prepared very specifically for your child. Those are all things that are very relevant for early feeding, and even those transitional purees to table foods. And I will tell you that if I have a child that's 5 years old that comes in and still has feeding concerns, that those things are just as relevant for me, because there might be small signs of a medical complication early on that a lot of people might miss. And so it could be very much lying in those early years and just maybe been missed a couple of times. And that's okay. That's why you come to a specialist. And so after reviewing that case history and doing a little bit of a parent interview, I generally go to a structural assessment if I can. When you have a structural assessment, I will tell you that it will go 50-50. And if you have someone that works with pediatrics, they will go either way. If your child closes that mouth and locks up and they're not moving for anything, that will be completely fine. If your kid will open right up and show teeth and tongue and all of that, same thing. And so if that's a concern for you, if you're thinking my child isn't no way going to open their mouth, that's okay. That's completely okay. And don't rule out seeking an opportunity for help if you need it, just based on that. Because if you have someone flexible in their understanding, they will roll with the punches and keep going forward with that feeding eval. But a structural assessment, all that's going to be is looking at facial symmetry, teeth, dental alignment, your child's tongue, and if they can move their tongue fluidly for chewing and swallowing, all of those factors. Sometimes there can be pieces structurally that can impact feeding development and acceptance of foods. And so that's a big piece for any speech pathologist or feeding specialist that's looking at your child. From there, you will be looking at that functional assessment. And so with structure, there's always function. And again, if your child is not going to open their mouth, most likely if they're hungry, they might be willing to eat. And so that functional assessment can play a piece there as well. If your child's chewing patterns might look a little bit delayed, if they have a hard time moving food around in their mouth, if they swallow, if their tongue comes out, those are all pieces for functional assessment that a specialist will be able to look at and delineate if there are delays for your child. Those all align with that mealtime observation. And sometimes mealtime observation will go, depending on the SLP or the feeding specialist that is working with you. The mealtime observation might be in your home, and they'll ask for you to have utensils and things that are similar to mealtimes for your child. If they have a preferred spoon, a preferred plate, those are all considerations for mealtime observation. For telehealth right now, that's a little bit of a benefit for a feeding eval, because sometimes if a child comes in a clinical setting, the way that they might eat for me might look different than what they're going to eat at home. And so that's something even more beneficial right now to take advantage of. If you have to choose telehealth for your feeding evaluation, those are still things that can be taken care of if you have a flexible professional to work with you. From that mealtime observation, there will also be probably a period where that professional will talk to you about flags and concerns they saw, and whether or not intervention is necessary or additional referrals might be necessary. If there's concerns for choking or safety during swallow, you might be discussing instrumental testing, where your child might go for a modified swallow study or a FEES study. And that is just using medical instrumentation where they look at your child's anatomy to make sure that nothing is going wrong that could be causing them to choke, that could make swallowing and eating a little bit harder and not as safe. Additional consults as well, in terms of if there's flags for an allergy referral, if there's flags for a GI discussion that might need to happen. Those are all things that will happen at the end of that feeding eval. So discussing all of that might seem like that feeding eval is really big and an SLP wears many hats. I will tell you that I do feel like I wear very many hats throughout the process of a feeding evaluation. But in terms of what my guiding body kind of says for an SLP's role, I wanted to provide that for you guys so you kind of know what to expect out of your SLP for a feeding eval. Your SLP should be providing prevention information. So you might be discussing what flags and risk factors for feeding development and feeding difficulties look like. They will work with you to educate others. I will tell you that I have had many conversations with caregivers about explaining a feeding disorder to a family member, or coping in a situation where someone might not understand that your child is only eating French fries and that's okay. and there are steps that you continue to work through, but sometimes that's something to just hear, that it's okay if your child is stuck there right now. It's just the steps afterward that make that so much more important. And so talking and educating others, conducting comprehensive assessments, that huge section we just went over for feeding evals is very comprehensive, and all of those pieces are very much necessary. Diagnosing speech, language, swallowing disorders, all of those things. Off of that, we also work with referring patients. And I will tell you that this, I feel like, is one of the biggest pieces as my role as a professional is referrals. Sometimes there are questions that you need more answers to. And so helping parents find a GI doctor to talk to, find an allergist that will work with a child that's not eating and can do food trials. Those connections are huge. And so that is something that I take very seriously in my role as a pediatric therapist. Recommending feeding plans, counseling, serving in an interdisciplinary team, remaining informed about research, and advocating for parents as a whole. So those are all just small pieces as a role of an SLP in feeding. So like I said, I can connect you to a lot of different referral sources for your child if necessary. When you think about your feeding team, it might be one person at first, it might be 5 people. But the best mindset to go in with is that they are a team for your child. And so each person's going to have their own role, and they all have to be on the piece that they're going to work together with you and your child. But from there, like I said, you can see this huge list of medical professionals, and it can be all encompassing. There can be people that are on this list and people that are not on this list. Your pediatrician, a GI doctor, an ENT, cardiologist, psychologist, a genetic specialist if you have other concerns, a neurologist, pulmonary concerns for a pulmonologist, allergies. I see a lot of allergies in this area. Social workers, dentistry, orthodontics, craniofacial. Craniofacial is just looking at at the structures of your face, and if there's concerns structurally that need to be addressed. A lactation consultant, physical therapy, occupational, speech therapists that might not specialize in feeding, but they work with your child on AAC, or they work with your child with language development, or a facial myologist. Dietitians and nutritionists are huge, and teachers as well, because those teachers spend your days with your kids in the school system, and they can take advantage of so many positive experiences at school. And so they're a huge piece of your feeding team too. But the biggest piece of your feeding team is you. And I try to drive that home as often as possible, because I might have parents that are very lost, and the referrals seem too much, and the stress is very all-encompassing, and just overcoming. And that's understandable. If your child's not eating, I can understand where that would be stressful. But you are ultimately the leader of that team. And so if you at any point need help, call on your team members. I try to be a big person on all of my children's teams, that if their parent feels like they cannot go forward, or if they're stuck, to call me, to text me. If you can find people like that on your team, get those people in your team and keep them there. They're foundational for you, because we're not all going to have 110% moments. We're going to be 95, we're going to be 70, we might be 30%. And when we can't pull our weight, we have to have people on our team to help us pull the weight. And so if you need that help, please seek it out, and don't be afraid to seek it out. But like I said, you're foundational, and your value and perspective, it's incomparable to anybody else on that team, because you know your child, you know their history, their likes and dislikes, their personality. You are going to be their greatest and motivated advocate. And so you have a huge role in that team, and don't ever forget it. So one thing that I had a recommendation from a colleague to kind of discuss was the benefits of a collaborative approach and why it was so important to have your team. And so this little bit of a case study here is about, it might sound like your child. This is a 5-year-old little boy who was diagnosed with autism at 2. And his diet included, when I evaluated him, his diet included Cheetos, the original crunchy Cheetos, Cheez-It crackers, strawberries, apple slices, orange slices, chicken nuggets from McDonald's and Wendy's only, buttered toast, scrambled eggs, water through a preferred straw cup, and Danimals drinkable yogurt. And so that's a little bit of a risk factor too, in terms of considering diet. If your child's got that very limited inventory, if it's less than 20 foods, that's something to kind of be looking at too. So that little boy came in, and after his evaluation, it showed that he had oral motor delays that impacted his chewing and manipulation of foods. His swallow pattern was impacted. Parent report and interview showed that he had some tummy problems. He struggled with constipation and diarrhea. That is something also, please do not ever feel bad to discuss poop with anybody. That is something that can be very foundational for a child with feeding. And so if you think that that might be a concern, don't be afraid to voice it. But this little boy had some stomach problems, and some allergy flags for me. He had little red bumps on his skin that looked a little bit like hives, presented with some allergy symptoms. And so we did a referral for his pediatrician and looked at comprehensive blood work, and he identified with having a nutrition deficiency. And so he was referred to a dietitian for a nutrition consult. And then from there as well, he had an allergy referral, and that allergy referral identified a dairy allergen. And if you remember those foods that that little boy was eating, he was eating Cheetos and Cheez-Its and Danimals yogurt, and all of those have dairy components. And so that guided his feeding therapy in terms of limiting those dairy foods and incorporating a variety of other foods for him. that were similar to interest. And so from there, the benefits of that, of just going forward, is that don't discount those referrals. Don't discount the team approach. That's something very foundational for your child. But going forward from there, considerations for feeding and swallowing as a whole. Something that I was speaking with Sarah and it kind of clicked for me was that a feeding disorder is very similar to a sensory breakdown for your child. There can be ranging severities. It might be 1 minute, it might be 30 minutes. There could be any cause. And as a parent of a child with autism, I'm sure that many of you all know that there could be any cause, and sometimes you might never find the cause. And so that's a piece. And then looking forward at, there's no true one-size-fits-all solution. And so just like a sensory breakdown, feeding is very similar in that there's ranging severities, there's a variety of causes, and not one thing is going to work for every child, as much as I wish it would. So looking forward, find your team, identify those problems, and start with small steps and focus on those small steps, because I try to drive it home for some of my parents as much as I can that it might take a significant amount of time to work up to that food. But if you're working from touching to tasting to smelling, to building those foundational steps with one food, that's just building those experiences as a whole. And so hang on to those little steps and those little successes. If you are looking to just build some fun for your child and move forward with some feeding progress, there are some things that I look to recommend just in general for anybody that's wanting to boost their child's experiences with food. The first thing is to make mealtimes fun. Just simple as that. The best way that a child learns is through play. So make animal faces, make silly cars with fruits and vegetables. Let a preferred toy explore a food with your child. One of my favorite things is to incorporate sensory play with foods. And so you might take chocolate pudding and make cookie rocks and let Paw Patrol run through and come to the rescue. Don't be afraid to be messy. Those fun experiences, when you take the pressure away from eating, can be so powerful for your child. And secondary to that, ditch those pressures for yourself, for your family, for your child. Make it fun, and start at your child's level. And so if your child is nowhere interested with touching, start with just looking. Do the play for them. Let them watch you interact and see you have a fun time. If they will touch things with you, then work forward with letting your child scoop foods and dump them into a mixer. Stack foods up and knock them down with a character toy. Those are small little steps to build those positive experiences with food. And lastly, those key resources that I have. I will tell you that Melanie Potic is a go-to for a feeding therapist. She is very powerful in that she does blogs and short articles that can be accessed relatively quickly and read through very quickly, which is important for any parent. And she also has experience as a feeding specialist and a mother to a picky eater. And so that's something that makes her perspective a little bit more powerful too. I've also listed on here Feeding Matters and my guiding organization, the American Speech Language Hearing Association. Feeding Matters is another nonprofit organization that works to support children with feeding disorders and their families. And so one of my favorite things that they have introduced as a whole is the Feeding Matters Infant and Child Questionnaire. This is something that is a little bit more of a supportive documentation for your concerns for your child. So you can access this link and go in and put in your child's birth information, and it will generate milestones for your child. And so you can look and see if your kid is 3 years old, some of the things that he should be able to be doing with meal times and table foods and drinking. If your child is 2 years old, you can go back and look at some of those early foundational milestones and see if your child is where they need to be feeding wise, or if you should have some more concerns. So that is definitely a resource to check out. All right.
Thank you so much, Brooke. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
For everybody that's stuck with us or wasn't able to watch this, I'm going to be posting Brooke's presentation into the comments so that you can go back and pull it and have it for your own. We did have a question earlier that I didn't bring up, but I'm going to go back to it now. Deidre Darst asked, can you talk about the phrase, he will eat when he's hungry, and why that is problematic advice?
I love that question. And I feel like that was asked just for me.
It was, I'm sure.
That is a horrible phrase for advice for anybody that's struggling to get their child to eat. One, because I feel like that discounts anybody that's struggling with their child eating and makes it seem like it's something that you should just be able to make your child do, which is the furthest thing from the truth. If you're waiting for your child to eat when they're hungry, there could be 3 very significant factors that warrant a feeding evaluation outside of that. If your child, you could be waiting for them to eat when they're hungry when they might have medical complications. And so if they have an allergy to foods, if they have some GI issues that might be impacting their meal times, that's one thing that is huge, that medical concern. If you're waiting for your child to eat when they're hungry, they might have oral motor concerns. And so eating a plate full of food might be really difficult if your child is only chewing up and down, and it takes a significant amount of time for your child to get through that food. So they might not eat as much, and it just might not be appealing. The third piece of that, of a sensory consideration, if you are waiting for your child to eat and they have sensory concerns that are not being recognized or addressed, just if, for example, I hate sushi, I would probably starve for 3 days before I would eat sushi. So if you have a child that has those same sensory concerns, that's the third piece of waiting for your child to eat when they're hungry. Is just not, in a feeding specialist recommendation, a valid response to a feeding concern.
Thank you for that explanation. Okay, Taylor asked, what are some signs that we as parents know that our team is collaborating together? Would you recommend sharing an email info from team member to team member?
So there are several ways that you can work with your team to get them all on board. The big piece that I like to always have is I like to have a release for contact and shared information. And so most medical professionals will offer that to you when you start services or when you go back to just renew paperwork yearly. That's something you can also ask for at any point of, hey, I've had a change in my child's therapy plans, and I would like for their therapist to be able to provide information to you. Just that shared information agreement on both sides will open that door a little bit more. So that's step one. If you are looking at a little bit more of a close-knit network, if you are communicating with your child's teacher, if you're communicating with their therapy team and you can't be at every appointment, I have seen notebooks be passed back and forth relatively well in terms of just a teacher writing a small note or an occupational therapist saying, hey, we've worked on this today. These are some things that were a little bit harder. Those are all considerations. And your collaboration can be as big or as small as you would like it to be. And as willing as your professionals will allow it to be. And so I have some pediatricians that I can contact and call. I have some pediatricians that would prefer to have a paper fax to them that has my concerns delineated. It's just depending on the professional and what's set up for them.
Valerie asked, what would you recommend if something that the kid eats regularly just stopped? They might go back to them like a month later.
Ooh, I love that question. Not that it's a fun question, but that's something I forgot to mention. So if your child is eating something very routinely and it's completely stopped, and you might come back to it a month or two later and it slowly starts to come back in, that is something that a specialist would call a food jag. And that is another flag for a consideration for a feeding evaluation for me, especially if your child has a very limited range of foods that they're going to. So if you have 10 or 15 foods off the top of your head that you know your child's eating, and they zone in on that one food and eat it and eat it and eat it, and then it's gone, and you cannot get your child to eat anything else after that, or it's really hard to get that food back in or to start another food. That is definitely something referred to as a food jag, and is something that I see as a red flag for a feeding referral.
Okay. I have a question. So you talked a lot about refusal to eat, or is there, like, most things on the spectrum, if one thing is true, another can be as well. What if they're compulsive eaters? Is that something? Or is that totally different?
Yes, no, you are not wrong. That's something that I did not mention. So with autism, you can see children that overeat. And that's something that when I was looking at research, just looking through and kind of looking to support some things, food stealing was something that came up and was very shocking for me as a professional, that was something that was identified. And I would associate food stealing with more of a compulsive eating. And so that's definitely something that if you have a child that you feel that they eat and eat and eat, that their needs are never met, that they're never fulfilled, that would be something to maybe discuss with your doctor a little bit more and see if that might warrant a feeding eval for them.
Okay. Yeah, because a lot of times our kids are on medications that might stimulate their hunger. But I've noticed that, I'll be honest, I've noticed it with my kid. I'll find candy wrappers stuck in his pocket, or granola wrappers, whenever I was like, you're only supposed to have one, and then I'll see hidden food. And it's also like, if he's eating something at dinner time, sometimes, not all the time, he'll eat so quickly that he doesn't realize how much he's eaten, and then he gets sick.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure if it was possibly in this realm, and it could be in a different, but I thought I'd ask.
No, very good question. And like I said, that would be one, I would take that back to your pediatrician, and guide that question, starting with the medications, and looking at if those medications have factors that might play a piece for appetite, and if they could be concerns for that way. There are also considerations that you could look forward to in that manner. And something that I didn't mention is that sometimes you will have pushback from pediatricians, from other medical professionals. And I say that I love my pediatricians, but sometimes feeding is something that is so complex and not really understood by a lot. And so when I recommend something, sometimes it might not line up on the other side of why I'm recommending it. And so taking in that documentation, taking in your concerns, and why they're concerns for you, the food diaries, the Feeding Matters questionnaire that kind of outlines things that your child should be doing and what they might not be doing and why it's a concern. That's a lot of supporting documentation that can help get those wheels rolling a little bit faster too.
Thank you for that. That's all really great information. Another thing Brooke's going to share with me that we don't have prepared to share with you just yet, but we will soon, is a list of, it was a list of, was it SLPs or was it feeding
Yeah, you're good.
specialists?
I'm going to try to get together a list of feeding therapy sites, specialists, multidisciplinary teams across the state. I know my region and my backdoor and people that I refer to. But I want to try to be a little bit more comprehensive in what I give you guys. But yeah, I will have that to you guys immediately.
Thank you so much. So stay tuned for that. If you would like to reach out to me, if you don't see me post it in the next week or so, I'm going to put my contact information up here because you might have to remind me. I'm a busy mom too, and sometimes I forget things. So you can email me here at wvcaresforautism@gmail.com. I'm also available by phone, which is 304-306-80 or 0847. Does anybody have any more questions for Brooke?
I had a kind of question comment for both of you because, Sarah, I'm in a very similar situation with my son. He went, it's really funny, when he hit about 6 or 7 years old, he went from not wanting to eat anything to wanting to eat everything all the time. One thing, and I'd really love your advice on this, Brooke, because it's a suggestion, but I'm not the professional, is we had to make snacks and meals very structured. We have a really specific time. And that stinks because you like being able to give your kids a treat. Which I'm not saying we don't do that, but as far as like snack time, we have to do it super structured, and you can only have this one thing it's as soon as they get home from school, and then right before bed they get a non-sugar snack. But we had to make it, which you've been with Reese, if he was allowed, he did eat an entire pizza by himself. So,
he was eating jalapenos out of my garden, or tomatoes straight out of my garden.
Yeah, I
didn't think he'd do it. He loved them.
We'll talk about going back to Miss Sarah's to eat some tomatoes. And one unfortunate thing is that if say he's very focused on times and dates. So say as a treat, we get a donut one Tuesday. For about a month, every Tuesday after that, he will expect that donut. And it's really, it can be frustrating. But Brooke, do you have any suggestions along those lines of just time structure or visuals about what you can get? Or
well, you're great. I love these questions because you guys are calling me back to things that are huge pieces. I could go for days on recommendations, but that is definitely something that can play a big piece if you have a picky eater or a restrictive eater, or just a child that is struggling with meal times, is to give them routines, because we all thrive with a routine. Just like when COVID came and all of our routines went in the trash can, we scattered for about a month. So a child is the same way, in that if you give them that routine, that's a way to start building a foundational experience, because you give them something to expect. If they know that you can set the dining table, and you give them their plate and they have their place on that dining table, and they know what that food presentation is going to look like. That you have 2 or 3 different foods, and you might have a bigger spoon and a smaller spoon if it's a sample spoon, of giving them an opportunity that if they don't want to take a lot of a food, or if it's a food that's harder for them, to just put that food on their plate. Those are small steps to building that routine. And I think that, like I said, it's a foundational piece. If you have a child that's a little bit anxious in a situation, to give them that routine, to give them something to expect on the other side of that. But on the downside of that, I also see your piece of when one thing is part of that routine where it might stay for a little bit. And so, like I said, though, the best piece of that is that it's became foundational and makes that mealtime a little bit easier. And so if there's something that your child enjoys, or you can make that mealtime fun, absolutely look at some small things like that.
Thank you.
Question.
I'm trying. I mean, and I think we can all speak as parents, like it's really hard to try to navigate any of this. I've tried meal prepping for him so that there's pre-portioned foods that I know he likes ready to go. But for him, it's different. It's not that he won't eat the same thing too many times in a row. So he gets burnt out, and then he's like, nope, don't want any of this, nothing. And then you're still stuck making more food. So again, my situation is a little bit different, but it's everybody's heart is valid, and each one of us are going through something different. And it's great to have this space to share and talk about that. So
Absolutely.
That's what it's about.
Yeah.
We're all struggling. I think you said it perfectly. Everybody's heart is valid and they're different, but there's also the similarity of it needing to be validated and parents needing a safe space to say something very reasonable, which is, this is hard.
Yeah. And I'll add too, something that I didn't say for you guys is that if you have concerns, but you aren't fully ready to jump, or you can't delineate whether or not you need to go forward with therapy, you can contact a feeding specialist and they can do a little bit of a screening and look at your child a little bit more comprehensively and identify whether or not that a feeding evaluation might need to be something to go forth with. And so if you have some questions that you're kicking around that some pieces still don't line up or don't make sense, you can absolutely reach out to some of the professionals that I'm going to give you guys, and some of the teams, and get some of those questions answered and see if a feeding eval might be for you.
Jana said something, and Jenna, I'm sorry, I said Jana earlier too, so I'm sorry. Are you also an SLP, Jenna? Is she? Okay. She says, food jags are huge for many kids. We try to aim for three different foods or food versions for around 3 days before a repeat, if possible. So is what I was talking about, like where he'll eat the chicken and the rice and the vegetables for like 2 days, and then he's like, get this out of my face. Is that considered a food jag potentially, or?
Not what I would consider a food jag.
Okay.
So when I see a child that has a food jag, something for me would be a flag of if your child is only eating chicken nuggets, and then 2 weeks later that child completely refuses chicken nuggets. And no matter how many times you present that child a chicken nugget, no matter how hungry they are not going to eat that food. Yes, okay. Like Jenna said, it's over and over and over, and then it's just gone. And I've seen children that will jag. It could be 3 days, it could be 3 months. There's sometimes no delineation in that time frame of what a food jag can look like. But the serious part of a food jag and the stressor for for my parents is that child might be eating 5 foods and and then it's gone. And that is where I see a significant amount of parental stress come in. And so,
I can imagine.
Yeah. Like I said, it's their food, it's their staple, and it is gone. And then you don't know where to go with your child. And so that's a big piece in therapy. If you see food jags for your child, to kind of go forward with your therapist and make a plan, like Jenna was suggesting.
Yeah, this is great. See, I told you, I learn something every week. I love it. All right. Well, I think that's it for questions right now. Thank you so much, Brooke.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
We're going to transition to Taylor, who's going to talk about self-care, correct?
Yes, I'm talking about self-care. Real quick, I wanted to point out a comment that I loved, and I can't think of a better example of a message I really want to get out. And so earlier, Valerie said that her child has huge texture issues. However, we are working on it. And I love that so much because of the however we are working on it. If you do say something that is a stressor for you or problematic for you, it is so important, not just when you talk to others, but even try to do it in your head when you talk to yourself. Always add a positive on it and give yourself credit for what you're doing. So Valerie, thank you for that example, and thank you for giving yourself credit. I hope that all of you are giving yourself credit. Like I said last week, that you are on here right now looking for resources. Give yourself credit for that. I'm so happy for that example. I wanted to talk about self-care, and I think so. It sounds pretty self-explanatory when you first say it. You say self-care, and it's taking care of yourself. But that goes, I think it can be hard to get a full round scope idea of self-care. I think a lot of times now when we see memes or hear people talk about self-care, we think of something really extravagant, like go hiking for a day, or, go get your nails done, go see a movie. And even if COVID wasn't a factor, we all know that childcare or being able to just get away for a few minutes is very hard. So I kind of wanted to talk about self-care tailored to parents who might not find it so easy to get away. Self-care is extremely important because you, as Brooke so wonderfully said, you are your child's most important team member. And if you're not taking care of yourself, not only are you not doing a service for you, but you're missing out on a big service you can do for your children, because you want to make sure that you are treating yourself kindly and treating yourself the best. So one simple thing, and I hope I don't sound too silly saying it, but drinking water is so important. And it's an important way to be in tune with your body. If you're, symptoms of dehydration, you can be tired, you can have a headache. You will feel so much better if you just drink water. So, and I'm not saying like get one of those big jugs that has like the little timed, 8 o'clock, take a drink. You know what I'm talking about. But if you notice, hey, my mouth is dry, my head hurts, consciously walk to the kitchen, pour some water in a cup. If sometimes I have a soup cup because I haven't gotten to cleaning the dishes, but get yourself a drink of water. And that's a really simple start out. Excuse me. Another thing is taking 5 minutes. Excuse me, I haven't coughed this whole time. Taking a conscious 5 minutes a day. That's my big challenge for you guys. And if that means stepping out on your porch for 5 minutes to breathe air, I saw one suggestion that said if you feel like you have a bunch of pent up energy, when you check your mail, run as fast as you can, like an energy burst to your mailbox. And if you feel like it again, run back to get some of that nervous energy out. You can step on a porch and take deep breaths. You can just enjoy your scenery, whether it be cars driving by on a road, or if you, live in a more rural area, just, looking at birds or just noticing, consciously notice being outside and giving yourself a break. Another thing is if let's say it's snowing or raining, watch a YouTube video that gives you enjoyment. So I think a lot of us can get into that habit of being on our phones and just scrolling and mindlessly watching stuff just to escape, just to have that stimulation. And so I'm not saying do that. I'm saying try to consciously think, what is something that would make me happy? Search it in your little search bar and do it. I know some people like makeup videos. I really like those videos where they rescue a dog. Like you see this scrungy little dog and then they wash it. They're like 7-minute videos. They wash it and then you see the happy little dog running after. But think about, what is something I like? What is something I can get joy out of? And then go search that YouTube video. You can also unsubscribe from something that's really bothering you, like popping up on your emails. I know sometimes my phone gets little patings from a store I bought one thing from like 2 years ago. And I got so much relief from finally going in and unsubscribing and not having that one more thing bothering me or calling for my attention. Another thing is you can write down gratitude. You can have a gratitude journal. What's one thing you liked about today? What's one good thing today? What's one thing you want to give yourself credit for today? And if you live in a household like mine where notebooks and pens disappear all the time, if it's hard to keep track of things, I really have a feeling that you often have your phone beside you. So go in that little notes app and write, your gratitude journal. And that's something you can look back on. And so I really want to challenge you guys to think, what is something I can do for 5 minutes a day to show myself I love myself? If you're having a really difficult day to get self-care, go to the bathroom and brush your hair. Consciously say, I deserve to take care of myself. I deserve to brush my hair. I deserve to brush my teeth. And that's another way, though, drinking water comes back in. You deserve it. When you take these moments, it's not just, I'm taking this moment because I need to get away. It's, I'm taking this moment because I deserve a moment for myself. And I can say from personal experience that if you give yourself that 5 minutes away and then take a deep breath and go back to, the chaos you were leaving. And I'm just, when I say chaos, I'm just assuming that your all's households are as chaotic as mine, but it helps you feel better prepared. So I really want to challenge you guys to think of what's the way I can tell myself I love me, what's a way I can take care of myself, and then do it. And I'd love for you guys, when you come back, to tell me, put in these comments, what did you do? Because we're all gaining support and advice and ideas from each other.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. So that's the homework, huh? To take 5 minutes and then be able to tell you next week. Well, we're not meeting next week, the 21st. So you have 2 weeks, everybody, of doing 5 minutes for yourself. And then we want to hear what you've done.
And you know what? Valentine's Day, letting yourself extra. For Valentine's Day, I want you guys to take 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And, keep a document. If you do something and you say, that didn't really make me feel relaxed, or I just did not like it, make note of that too. So you can really find from what you like to continue things you like. Because you deserve it. At the end of the day, I can't stress that enough. You deserve to love yourself and take care of yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that was perfect. Well, I'm going to, I mentioned this twice, but our presenter next week is rescheduled for the middle of March. So we're not going to meet back here until, let me pull this up, February 21st, 8 to 9 p.m. And we're going to discuss something really important. We're going to discuss safety and elopement with Jill McLaury, who is a board certified behavior analyst, and she is the CEO of Bright Futures Learning Services. We hope you can join us then. If you have any questions, was there a way to get a hold of you, Brooke, or?
Yes. Can you put it in the chat box, because I'm not sure?
Yeah, I can put it in there. Yeah.
My email is ebthevenin@gmail.com. ebthevenin@gmail.com.
ebthevenin.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Okay, so I put Brooke's email address in there. If you have any questions about what we discussed today, please follow up with her. Look back to us. She's going to get us that list of referrals throughout the state. So no matter if you're in the Eastern Panhandle or the Northern Panhandle, hopefully we'll have somewhere to send you to at least start getting an evaluation if you suspect your child has a feeding concern. So, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Taylor, for joining us again. And we'll talk to you all soon. Enjoy the rest of the Super Bowl if you came and joined us for just this part. Thank you.